Good morning, or afternoon if you're in Europe, or very early morning out on the West Coast. Welcome to the second day of Data Summit Connect. So we're pretty excited about yesterday, which was lots of wonderful information that was being dispensed by all of our wonderful speakers. And we've got even better stuff for you today. So just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. I am your conference program director, Mary D. Ojala, and I would like to remind you to visit the exhibit area because we've got some really wonderful stuff going on there for you to learn about. Oh, and you can win some prizes, I understand, as well. We do have a place you can take selfies of yourself. That's in the launch the photo booth place. And you could win prizes. Are we seeing a theme here? Yes, indeed we are. And do remember that following the talks by our speakers, we do have that networking area where you can go and continue your conversation with speakers and with colleagues who are attending the Data Summit Connect conference. So without further ado, I will introduce our opening keynote speaker for today, Seth Early. He's the founder and CEO of Earley Information Science, and he's been dealing with knowledge strategy, data, information architecture, search-based applications. Extremely knowledgeable guy, and he's been doing this for about 20 years. So he has also written a book recently called The AI Powered Enterprise. And I understand from Seth that he also is going to be giving away some copies of the book, and he is going to have some more details for you on that. So he is going to talk to us this morning about creating data-driven decision frameworks. So take it away, Seth.
Thank you, Mary D. I really appreciate you guys having me. And I'm not going to take a full hour here. I'm going to have enough time for questions. So please put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A. I didn't come up with any polls, but I think we can just keep it unstructured, and you guys can ask questions as you go. So please think about what you'd like to learn about in terms of the concepts that I present to you. And here's the thing: the challenge with many of the initiatives that we are undertaking in the data, content, information management space, it's difficult to justify. From a couple of perspectives. It's difficult to cost justify things, and it's difficult to drive decisions with data as opposed to opinion. A lot of times, the most senior person in the room makes the decision, or you pass around a framework, and people kind of check off and then say, "Oh, that's okay," and then somebody changes it. So it's usually he or she who yells the loudest, gets their project funded, or the most senior level person in the room, and so on. And so what we want to do is really take that opinion out and really try to do things based on data and drive those decisions with data. Everybody talks about being data driven. We want to be a data driven organization, but really lack the framework and lack the tools and lack the integration in which to do this. So again, what we want to do is we want to do this in such a way that we can drive those decisions based on data that we can harvest from multiple systems and applications. Hi, Sharon. Sharon just popped in and left. So a lot of you, as Mary D mentioned, what I just wrote a book called The AI Powered Enterprise. It doesn't have my medal. I just won the Axiom Silver Award for books on business and artificial intelligence. But for the first 10 people that send me your mailing address, and again, it's a physical book, so I can just get your mailing address, send me your email as well. I won't bother you. But here's my email address down here, seth@earley.com. Send me a note, and I'll get a copy, signed copy off to you. Also, please connect with me on LinkedIn or, follow me on Twitter. I don't know if anybody uses Clubhouse, but I'm starting to investigate Clubhouse. So if you have any ideas for that, I'm happy to work with you. I don't know why I'm on here twice. I seem to be Seth Early live, real Seth Early, and it seems to be fake Seth Early there. I don't know. Anyway, here's stuff on the book. People said great things, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so let's think about what we want to do when we are building a data-driven decision-making framework. Really what we have to do is we have to have a hypothesis, right? We have to have a presumption about what we want to impact. And we need to have baselines. We need to capture baseline data. So every time you are interacting with any system or process, anytime a customer is interacting, there's got to be a baseline. Think about the ways that you can capture information about, having search logs, having metrics around website behaviors, having metrics from your operational systems. We have to have a process where we can measure a baseline, and we have to be instrumented for that. So no matter what you look at, can you measure a baseline? Can you measure a current state? And this has to go across lots of processes. And I'm going to show you an example of how we think of this using the customer lifecycle, but you can also use it for the employee lifecycle. You can use it for the developer lifecycle. You can use it for DevOps. You can use it for supply chain. You can use it for virtually any process in the organization where you collect a baseline. And then we have to say, all right, now, well, we have to kind of have a sense of, well, what changes do we believe we need to make, and what will the impact of those changes be? And again, part of this is a little bit of experimentation. Part of this is understanding the process at a deep level. Many times it's mapping out the systems that people go to and the quality of the deployment of the tools in those systems, whether you have the supporting processes or not. And again, what you're trying to do is you're trying to measure a current state of a process, as well as supporting processes and the maturity of supporting processes. So many times when we're doing this, it's not just about the metric, it's not just about the operational piece, but it's about the things that support that. I'll give you an example. We had done some work around personalization for an organization, built out the baselines, built out the architecture. And then when it came to understanding their different segments, the marketing team could not differentiate one segment from another in terms of what the messaging was. So it didn't matter what the impact of the two changes were. It didn't matter that we had the right architecture, that we tweaked that architecture. What really mattered was the supporting process, which was the marketing processes around understanding that customer and understanding what a differentiated experience was. So, a lot of times it's not just, the mechanics, but it's also what is surrounding the mechanics, right? But we still have to say, are we going to change our governance process? Are we going to change our design? Are we going to change a supporting process? Or we're going to reorganize, or we're going to have a new onboarding mechanism? And then what we want to do is say, okay, what happens? What's happened when we've made this change? What's the impact? And again, what I'm looking at here is you can do it with behavioral testing. You can do it, again, with lots of other things, but essentially you're trying to understand how the metric is being impacted. And then course correct. Where are our, what's happened? Did it work? Was it better? Was it worse? Sometimes you break things, right? Sometimes you make a change and you say, well, let's change our hierarchy. Let's change our taxonomy. Let's change our data structure. Let's change the process we're trying to streamline. And sometimes you break something. So you need to understand that you're not always going to get it right, but what you want to do is course correct. So this is really the basic premise that we're trying to put into this data-driven decision. Collect that baseline, whatever it is, hypothesize change, measure the impact, operational, behavioral, and then course correct. So what does this look like when you kind of put this, and many of you who have been to any of my sessions before have usually seen this. This is one of my old standard slides that I always use. curious as to how many people have seen this, but I don't have a poll. But the question is, we can be working in data, we can be working in taxonomy, we can be working in content, we can be working in search, we can be working in, onboarding of some sort of any kind of analytics. How does this impact revenue, right? But many times we're working in the weeds. We're doing data quality, right? Because we can't have these things working. If we're trying to do machine learning, we're trying to do some type of cognitive application or AI application, we have to fix the data. If we're trying to do personalization, we're trying to fix e-commerce, pick your area. Everything runs on good data, right? Everything runs on quality data. And this is a data summit. So the question is, many times your data sucks. I hate to say it. That's a technical term, by the way. I also say your baby is ugly. But the point is that when you know things are messed up, you have to fix them. And then what's the CEO or the senior leadership team going to say? Well, wait a minute, how does this impact revenue? How would it impact revenue? Well, I can't show you how you're impacting revenue because I'm working in the weeds, I'm working in the data. What do? You say that data, content, information has some kind of metric. You can measure the quality of the data. You can measure the fill. You can measure, the search precision. You can measure all sorts of things. You can measure the association with the process. You can measure heuristics of different sorts and so on. But so you can have data scorecards. You can say, how are we doing in our data remediation? That's great. This is great for setting up competitions between different business units. Many times we'll have large enterprise and, when you're trying to do remediation or cleanup, you can have one business unit being measured against another business unit. And you can say, okay, well, what is the, progress, and when you start bringing that up to leadership will say, well, wait a minute, why are we so far behind? Or look, we're far ahead. So many times, even these scorecards can be helpful in setting up kind of a competition between business groups or business units or departments and processes and so on. So that's one thing, but that still doesn't show how we're going to improve revenue. But data supports some kind of process, right? Data is always supporting process. And this is where we need to understand value chains and value streams and trust linkages, right? We need to understand, where does the data come from and what is it doing, right? Do we have ownership defined? Do we know what process requires which data as an input, which data is an output from a process, right? Because it's a fairly complex digital machine, right? The organization runs on digital machinery. Many times that's haphazard, many times there's friction, there's some, gears that grind a little bit, but it's a machine, right? It's a complex system, really. But you can start thinking about the chains of trust of data and how people use those inputs. So mapping those data sources, those data usages and ownership and provenance and quality and rights, all of these things have to be articulated for critical processes, right? You're not looking at boiling the ocean. You're not looking at everything. You're looking at critical processes. And I'm going to explain that in how you put that in the context of a life cycle, customer life cycle, developer life cycle, supply chain, whatever it might be, new vendor onboarding, new employee onboarding. It can be anything at all, right? Anything at all in the organization. But again, the process, so we have process scorecards. So we know that our process requires that we have good data, and then we can align that. We can show there's a correlation between the quality of this data, the completeness of this data fill. A lot of times we do e-commerce initiatives. And if you're doing e-commerce initiatives, if I was live, I would say, how many people are doing e-commerce initiatives? And you raise your hand. They say, how many are not? And you raise your hands. And I'd say, how many refuse to vote? That would be very funny if we were a live audience. I'm just telling you. But you've probably heard that if you've seen me speak. I haven't spoken live in so long, or here's live, but you know what I mean, face to face. That's pandemic humor. I'll keep going. So the point here is that the process, is supported by data. We measure that. We have process scorecards. We need to understand what data supports what process. Then the process supports an objective. What's the objective? What's the outcome? What's the business problem you're trying to solve? I like to say this is a level at which people either get bonused or this is where we catalyze a resume generating event. And I got that from my colleague, Chris Penn. I'll give him attribution. I'll give him attribution for the next few times and then I'll just take it. But anyway, I thought that was pretty fun. A resume generating event. You don't hit this at the leadership level or the business unit level, now you're in trouble, right? Because this is the stuff, these are the outcomes that people are getting measured on and bonused on or fired from. And we need to say, how does that align with our business strategy, our enterprise strategy, revenue growth, whatever it is, reduce costs, customer intimacy. You have all these drivers. When you have things like likelihood to recommend frameworks, there's so many drivers and sub-drivers. Likelihood to recommend is a gross score. It's an agglomeration, right? It's a consolidation of a lot of different drivers. It's like, do you like us or don't you like us? But there are lots of little pieces that are comprised of likelihood to recommend. There's lots of things that say, well, I had a bad experience with your service department. Okay, that's a service quality metric. My bill was not right. Well, that's a billing and finance, process, right? I couldn't find the products that I needed. Okay, that's a website navigation or user experience metric. I got the wrong parts. I couldn't find the accessories. I just left your site. Again, all of these things are digital body language that we need to measure to understand if we're meeting our objectives. And if you can start to establish this linkage, and believe me, just doing one of these, getting one level to the next, can be very challenging in a large enterprise. It's taken about 2 years for one of our large global enterprise, many billion-dollar company, multiple business units, multiple geographies, large product lines. It's taken about 2 years for them to just start to align data scorecards with some process outcomes. And we're getting to process scorecards and outcomes because it aligns with revenue. We can say that here's where data fill actually drives revenue because it drives conversions. Conversions lead to, and this is a company that doesn't do any business, any e-commerce on their website. They only work through distributors, but they can see signals about revenue generating events down the road. So they can see what's happening through that, measuring that digital body language on the site, and then see a bump in revenue from a distributor down the road for a particular product line. That's incredibly powerful because usually there's a big disconnect, especially in manufacturers that work through distributors. So understanding these linkages and understanding these ways of, getting those baselines and then understanding what the relationship between, what are the levers you can pull? What are the things, the knobs you can twist and turn? What things can you impact? And again, all of it starts with data. All of it starts with data. So if you don't have good data, you're screwed. That's a technical term, And of course, we doctors see sick patients, we see organizations that have messed up data. And believe me, you're not alone if you have data issues. Everybody does. And the big problem with getting funding is justification because leadership has been burned. Leadership has spent, God knows how much money, millions, billions of dollars on data initiatives and not gotten the results or digital transformations. I love when we have these digital transformations that depend on data and then they think of it as an afterthought. They say, oh, we'll just offshore the data fill to, India. And then they end up with poor data, crappy data, not aligned with the business process, errors and so on. Now you can use low cost mechanisms to do that. But again, there's got to be quality assurance. There's got to be alignment with the process. If the data is important, then you need to spend the money on it. And the only way to know if the data is important is by understanding this linkage. Let me give this to you in a bigger picture. And the linkage, there's the linkage. I always forget to do, I always tell when my guys are doing this slide, oh, there's one more click, but I wasn't watching, so I couldn't tell myself there's one more click. There's one more click. The linkage, that is critical. linking this from, the data all the way up through the process. Now, let's look at this from a slightly different context. Let's look at this from the customer journey. Let's think about it. And again, this can be customers are internal as well as external. So we're looking at external customer journey, but our internal customers also have a journey. Our developers are customers. Our operations people are customers. Our marketing people are customers. They have a life cycle. They have a journey. They have a value stream. And in each case, what we need to do is understand that journey, that value stream, and we need to understand the tools. We need to say, first of all, what department is responsible or what group is responsible for each phase of this, right? So, this is a typical learn, choose, purchase, use, pay, support. This comes from telecom. Learn, choose, purchase, use, pay, support. Anyway, but the point here is each department, now, of course, the life cycle traverses multiple departments, so there's always low overlap. But for the most part, there are metrics in each department that own pieces of this life cycle. Marketing is usually about learning, sales is about choosing, distribution, purchase, et cetera, service, finance, and support. So then we have to say, what are those processes, right? I mentioned we have to identify the processes, and then these processes have metrics, they have baselines, they have measures, but we also have accountabilities, right? These are the things that, what are they responsible for? What are their outcomes? So again, a process, a department, and then we have technology. Now, what we can do is we can overlay, then again, technologies will cut across lots of different areas. So you might have, like we are building virtual assistants and helper bots that can enable just about any process, right? It's really curated content and data, and you're exposing it through a conversational channel. That is the way of the future. That is primarily what my book is about. I mean, it says AI powered, it's cognitive stuff. It also talks about ontologies, data structures and governance and lots of case studies. But my point here is that you're going to have multiple systems that will support different pieces of the process. Oh, by the way, there's also another article I recently wrote about how to optimize all of these systems, because you might have 5 different systems that you're using in the learn stage, or there's lots of complexity behind this. But if you send me a note, I can send you that article as well. It's from the Journal of Applied Marketing Analytics. So it's really about assessing the health and value of these deployments. But we can start to overlay our scorecards, data and technology. Now, when you think about it, that is where we have that lowest level that I showed you before. We also have process scorecards. That's that mid-level. And then we have outcome scorecards, and that is that top level. So it's kind of turning it upside down. It's saying, let's score the data and the health of the technology. That's another thing that I didn't put in the other one. How well are we deploying the technology? Are we using it to its full functionality? Are we effectively deploying it? Do we have the right supporting processes? There's a whole range of maturity models that also goes behind this. So it's not just the data scorecards, but it's the maturity of the supporting process, and it's the health of the deployment. Are we fully using it? You probably have 2 or 3 systems that can support any one of these stages, maybe 5 or 10. I mean, the average marketing organization is like 20 systems that they use, but there's overlap, right? And how well are you aligning the functionality of that tool with the needs of that process and the data requirements and the outcomes, right? Where can you instrument? And then how healthy is that deployment? So there's a lot that goes into the technology scorecards and optimizing this stack. Excuse me. So again, let's look at a bunch of data and content related domains. This is really stuff that's more related to e-commerce, and I like e-commerce because it drives revenue. People can see it. They'll make investments in e-commerce. You can use investments in e-commerce to drive lots of other things. So it's a good place to kind of test drive some of these things, right? But again, you have to have a good business case. You have to say, how is this going to impact stuff? And these are a bunch of them, usability, search, taxonomy, content, product information. And what we can do is we can measure and drive decisions in each of those areas and have scorecards and then a decision-making structure. So we can even become very prescriptive. If we have a scorecard for this value, if it goes out of range, then we have an intervention. Then we measure that intervention, and then we shampoo, rinse, repeat. Okay, let's see. So now, here's the challenge. Of course, it's easy in PowerPoint. Works really well in PowerPoint, Seth. Yes, it does. But the problem is that we have these KPIs, these metrics distributed across departments, across functions. A lot of times, the process outcomes are very disconnected. There's no alignment. There's no correlation, right? And correlation is not, causation and correlation are not the same, but that's okay. We just need correlation because that's good enough for, for some of these things. We have different tools. We have different mechanisms. We have different instrumentation. There's no integrated decision-making and rules and authority. So again, a lot of times this is very fragmented across the enterprise. So that's one of the challenges. So when we start thinking about this, and we're going to dive in a little bit on product data because that's a good one. But again, it's distributed throughout the organization. But if we pick something like product data, and that's a good area to choose because it's very measurable, you can do things like measure the data quality, as I mentioned, right? You don't even need users for that. You don't even need behavior. You don't even need, outcomes, but you can simply measure how well your product information is measured, is structured and designed. Then we can start to say, well, let's test this stuff with users, right? We've built something, we've evolved it. Let's start testing. Well, what are the things we can do? We can test navigation, and we can use this with not even real users, but test users. We can look at navigation success, navigation, search recall, search precision, how easy it is to get to a particular product. One of the interesting things about the structure is that you can start understanding if products are buried, and then we have interaction metrics with users. And this is where, you're looking at things like conversions, you're looking at the product level, the category level, you're looking at search conversion, you're looking at click-through rates, you're looking at conversions from filtering, you're looking at category click-throughs, you're looking at downloads, all sorts of things. We can say, are people getting to the information they need, and are they able to successfully complete their transaction? And that's where, again, we start to look at how these things correlate, because again, that will then correlate with revenue, right? If we have increased click-throughs, if people aren't clicking through and they're bouncing out, if they can't find it, they can't buy it, right? So that's a pretty good determinant of whether people are going to get stuff. If they don't even get there to the product and they say, oh, can't find it, and they pogo stick out, that's a problem. But in our research, we found that there's a correlation between completeness and click rate. There's another, that's a 0.42 correlation. So in other words, you can correlate and say there's a relationship between these pieces. There's a correlation between fill rates and product conversion. There's also a correlation, I'm going to move my little bar here, between recall, search recall, and conversion. And these are just a couple of examples. There's lots of these different things. And you can start to show when you make changes at the data level, you can make changes, you can impact user behavior, and you can impact ultimately what people are purchasing and buying. Here's an example, excuse me, across an internal organization that had lots of different divisions. And basically this was looking across the organization and saying, what are the metrics that we can compare and benchmark? Because that's another piece, benchmarking. It's like, how do we compare from one department to the other, one group to the other? And you can see in some cases, these, there's attributes can be poorly managed or filled. maybe you don't have documentation. A lot of times there's a big disconnect between the knowledge processes and support processes and product information. A lot of times we see people don't think about knowledge as part of that customer journey, and knowledge is part of the customer journey, and you have to measure the value of that knowledge. You have to measure whether you have the documents and the content. When are people picking up the phone and calling the call center? When are they abandoning their journey? And what is related to that? What's related to that many times is the fact that you don't have the associated documents. You don't have the associated support content. You can also look across this. You can say, what are our competitors doing? Are we ahead of our competitors or behind our competitors? This is an organization that we had worked with for some time, and you can see there's some areas they're ahead and some areas they're behind, right? But the point here is many times organizations want to know, how are we doing? Are we the best of the worst or the worst of the best, right? Where are we? And what's going to drive that? And you have to realize that, if you have products out there and you don't have metadata, they're going to be invisible. And again, I'm diving in a little bit to product data because it can have a very solid, ROI. In this case, this was showing that for one site, there was a huge number of buried categories. And again, there's a calculation behind this that, one of my product data specialists can go to, but the buriedness, when things are buried, you find that you don't have the ability to find those categories. And again, there's this is saying how badly are they buried? How far down are they? And what you want to do is find, again, it's another metric. It's another metric that can be correlated with the revenue. And again, when you're starting to remove, when you're starting to surface things, you're looking at how can we make these products more available and get them out of that, even especially if they're high margin products or they are, high revenue products. If they are too far down in the hierarchy and people can't find them, obviously it's going to impact that. And again, these are reports that can start to correlate with other things. So those are some deep metrics in a couple of different areas. But I'll show you an example of a very of a comprehensive metrics-driven governance program and what the different elements are. But again, the way you get started is really use what you have. Look at market references. Before you go buy specialized software, just try to use. You have lots of analytics tools. It's a matter of finding the metrics that correlate, right? It's a matter of finding out how you can leverage, say, if you have Google Analytics or you have some other type of analytics tool, and then start looking at that, comparing it with the performance of your categories, your performance of your products. If there are governance programs, data governance programs, this is, again, product data. I'm picking a particular area because it does have a good ROI, and you can use that to catalyze other types of projects. These are usually easier to, but again, whatever your value chain is, you can do this. Revenue, you're using revenue and item counts. You're trying to take those metrics and look at conversion rates, and you're looking at those correlations between those different types of metrics, right? So, and then, consistent definitions and the explanation. So when you're trying to explain things to people, make sure you have an understanding, they have an understanding of what, product buriedness means, right? Or whatever the term you're using. You do need to show people, with simple visuals. You do need to get somebody on the business side who is going to look at those results and say, yeah, that makes sense, right? You can't come up with these things in a vacuum. I like to involve finance people whenever we're doing any kind of metrics program, because they'll be able to show how the pieces come together and be able to justify the chain of correlation and causation between a behavioral metric, an operational metric, and an outcome score, a financial metric. There's business rules and there are system-specific rules. Again, you need to think about those from the perspective of what is something that is a business rule that we need to abide by, and what is something that's required by a particular system. The data owners absolutely need to be involved and with early wins, and those quick wins have to be surfaced and socialized to your executives. You got to have quick wins, even if these are long-term programs. You got to be able to show, okay, here's how we're impacting this metric, and even if it's a I don't want to say trivial, but it's got to be clear, and it's got to show that causation. One of the things that we sometimes see is you get these reports and there's positive and negative statements in the summary. I've seen some examples of that, but just try to be consistent with how you're doing this. And again, when you're starting to look at rules for data, think of multiple dimensions. There's a lot of dimensions to data rules and to data completeness rules and to, the, product relationships, or, the alignment with a process, or, the provenance. When you're getting data from suppliers, one of the things to do is ask the suppliers, put it in your service level agreements to say to the suppliers, hey, you have to give us good quality data, and measure that. And that becomes, a rule around your data, and something you can measure, and something you can measure around your supplier. And again, it's really trying to, review these things on a regular basis and make sure that stuff is up to date. Excuse me. Pardon me. So again, this happens to be product information. Lots of different places where you're getting data. You have master data and product data. Again, there's lots of different. This can be for customer data. It can be for product data. It can be for vendor data. This can be for location data, employee data, and so on. And you're getting data, and you're also getting information from that customer digital body language. And then what has to happen is you want to apply your data quality metrics and conversions and scorecards to this testing environment, and then you can start to push out to downstream systems and be able to have scorecards and analytic tools that will measure multiple dimensions of multiple data elements. And ultimately, what you want to do is come up with data dashboards and process dashboards that will allow you to, again, collect that data, analyze it, test it, remediate, and then be able to see the measure, down the road in terms of partner feeds, e-commerce, websites. And again, there's all sorts of digital body language that you can collect from these guys. And that's where these analytic tools help us, right? So again, it's really looking at lots of different types of metrics program. It's looking at different data feeds. Oops. It's looking at things that that we can do in parallel. This is also about content as well, and knowledge. I mean, you can really apply this to anything. And you're trying to, instrument your system so that you can have that foundational metric around, views, sessions, click-throughs, whatever your metric is. You're trying to also understand the value of content and the value of data, whether that data is being used and leveraged in downstream systems. Like if you took away a data feed, we've seen situations where an entire department was eliminated at a financial service organization that was all involved in data munging, data manipulation, reports. Nobody noticed, right? So you have to say, what is the value, right? What is the value of this stuff? And again, building that integrated framework, it's really, about those dictionaries, those defined terms, those consistent tools, those libraries of analysis capabilities, libraries of tools, libraries of reports that can be shared across multiple areas. And then that, of course, can then be used for these various teams. You need different levels of detail for the different teams. Executive teams will see one level. The analytics teams are going to be deep in the weeds. The digital data folks, are another level. Those are folks that are trying to make those changes. And the executives want to know, well, what are we impacting? And how are you justifying stuff? So again, it's really integrated across multiple systems and processes. And it also has to have, include collaboration. Some of the tools that are data catalogs these days, like data.world, those have really good collaboration capabilities. So it shows who's using the data, how they're using it, how they're measuring the value of that data, what rights you have, what the provenance is, and so on. Again, lots of great stuff that can happen, right? When you do this on a consistent basis, you can significantly improve customer satisfaction, revenue growth, efficiency of onboarding, findability, search performance. And again, this is just in the product domain. You can have the same types of indicators and the same types of results. Better click-throughs, reduced bounces, faster time to market, or operational processes. You can really instrument any type of workflow in the organization and start to show how your pieces correlate. This is a playbook that we've built for organizations around these different domains. This is one example for web e-commerce and website metrics. But again, it cuts across lots of different areas, and there's many, many different metrics. So there's libraries of metrics that you can do. But again, you don't want to get overwhelmed. You don't want to overwhelm people. There's a lot of data, there's a lot of signals, there's a lot of analytics, there's a lot of stuff that comes through. However, it's separating the signal from the noise. A lot of that is noise. But one of the really important things to have in any of these programs is the right governance structures. One of the things that I talk about in the book is a case study of an organization that we built a governance program for. And this is 10 years now, 12 years now. And I talk about it in the book. It was a 2-year roadmap, but it was a structure. There's a publisher that had 100 imprints and many business units and lots of different divisions and different markets. And they had about 20 plus content management and technology initiatives going at any one time. We looked at all their strategic plans. There was about 2 giant binders. I think I was the only person who had ever read all of them. Printed them out so I can show them. 2 giant binders. And then we built a program that had the roles and responsibilities. There was actually a racy chart with another assignment chart. There were 2 charts, but one of them had 2,000 cells because we had to look at who should be involved with what, and then building the RACI. So you actually had to use, because there was so much complexity, and then build agendas for each of these groups. That actually, I talked to them 5 years after that. It was a 2-year plan. And I said, hey, I did that work back then. Do you know if it's still being used? And they said, oh yeah, we call it the Bible. I said, wow, that's great. 5 years later, I said, back then, 5 years, I used to call it the Bible. They said, we still call it the Bible. And then 2 years after that, 12 years. It's kind of unheard of. But the point that I'm making is if you build the right structure and you build the right accountability and you build this process for continual evolution and continual refinement and continual feedback, it's self-sustaining. It just works over that period of time, and you can continue to build it. Don't forget, send me, I should have my email in here again, but it's Seth, S-E-T-H, at Earley, E-A-R-L-E-Y, .com. Don't forget the E before the Y. There's a few different pieces in here that you can look at. And then, there's my email address. So you can reach out on LinkedIn. You can give me a shout. You can email me. And with that, I'm going to either take questions if there are any. So if you have any questions, if I've answered all your questions about everything you want to know about metrics and governance and data and data-driven decisions.
Yeah, that would be biblical, Seth.
Well, if there's no questions, then I must have answered all those possibilities, right?
I mean, frankly, the idea of 2 large binders just is staggering.
I know. I mean, they were like
Nobody is going to get through that.
they were like this, but that was what I read, to build the program, to build the governance structure. You're right. Nobody read them. Nobody looked at them.
No, I'm sure.
Nobody,
And,
you know,
at one point, maybe people would have, as we progress towards the digital world, fewer and fewer people are willing to spend the time to do that.
Yeah. Well, you know, people want things in bite size. You know, I like
exactly. They want it all in visual, because people
they want a framework, but they want bite-sized pieces.
That's right. That's right. You know, I was when you were originally talking about metrics, I was actually reminded of my father's favorite maxim, which was measure twice, cut once.
Right. That's right. That's right.
When you're talking about data driven, where does the human in the loop come into this when you're evaluating what the data is really telling you?
Sure. Well, it's always about human judgment. It's always about human creativity. So when you hypothesize, like an algorithm isn't going to hypothesize. That's human judgment, right? Humans need to say, here are the factors that I think are important. If I'm thinking about personalization and I want to test personalization, I first have to come up with personalized messages. That is knowledge. That is uniquely human. That is a creative endeavor. So, so the instrumentation has to be set up in such a way that humans make the judgment about what is important to measure, and then what the implication of a measurement that may be out of a range, right? What's a good range? What's a bad range? I mean, humans have to do that.
Sure.
A lot of the systems that we have is they throw off so much data, but there's little judgment, right? And people are overwhelmed with the data, and they don't have, you know, they're like, well, how do I interpret this? What does this mean? I hate when I get, you know, giant reams of data, you know, for something that I want to know what the bottom line is. Well, what's the decision we make, right? So humans have to abstract that and say, okay, and that's why it requires various levels. The granularity at the deepest level is very important for certain audiences.
Yep.
Need to make a decision, and then we need to extract that. So humans are always involved.
So we have this question is really up your alley, Seth. Many organizations don't have the right tags on their data. Not that, of course, you've ever encountered this, right?
Never seen that. It's
never seen it before. Of course not, right? So what is your? So his question goes on. What is your strategy to get tags on the data?
Well, again, that's data completeness. It's data fill. It's there's lots of different ways to think about it. You have to think of the information and the data on a continuum of value, right? We have low value stuff that's unfiltered, maybe uncategorized. Maybe it's news, maybe it's external news, maybe it's email, maybe it's blog posts, maybe it's text messages, all those things. That's very unstructured, that's collaborative, that's creative. But it doesn't have a lot of value because it's not in a shape where humans can really find stuff. It's low value, low cost, and low findability. Then we have to think, well, again, this comes back to that process. What process are we trying to support? Because we will use a combination of machine-generated tagging, right? Auto tagging, which can be rules, statistically based. There's pluses and minuses to each. And again, sometimes some organizations are using offshore resources who claim to use AI and machine learning, but actually use a lot of humans, maybe very little machine learning, but it's a hard problem to solve in certain situations. The most important piece is getting the structure right. And then the fill will depend on the value, right? Because you can't say it's going to take $5 per SKU and I have, well, you might take $5 per SKU, but you can't spend, millions and millions of dollars if you're not going to get that return in right?
Sure.
It has to be, make the punishment fit the crime, right? You have to find a cost-effective way, right, to do things that are appropriate to the value of that information. So you're not going to go upstairs in the attic and reorganize the piles of newspapers up there because there's no point. But what you will do is say, if I have something that's really important, I have these, repair manuals for my kitchen equipment or my warranties or my instructions. I want to put those in a file where I can find them and organize them, right? So the same thing with your organization. What is the value of that information? And then what is the process? What's it going to get you? That's why those measures and that linkage to the outcome is so important. That's when you can justify.
Yeah. So we have another question here.
One quick example, one large organization had spent millions of dollars on their data, but saw a $400 million increase in net new revenue. 400 million. Another organization went through a digital transformation. It was a $25 million digital transformation. The data piece was about $5 million. That's the part we did. And if that part wasn't done, that project would have failed. That led to a several $billion increase in the market capitalization of that company. We're not taking credit for all of that, but if the piece that we did wasn't there, it would not have succeeded. So those are the stakes, in addition to existential. That for some organizations, they're just not going to be around. They don't get it. They don't make the investment. They're going to go away, like the Blockbusters of the world.
So we do have another question here.
Sure.
This person wants you to address the incorporation of environmental, social governance. She originally said in the framework, but I would also add in the scorecards that you were talking about.
Yes. That is very good. And those are captured in maturity models. I didn't show them today, but I can show them in the article I mentioned. This article that I wrote in a peer-reviewed journal talked about not just the technology, but the supporting processes. And that is about the social. That's also other things. So you're right. There's a whole cultural piece of this. There's a change management piece. There's a socialization piece. And you have to get the influencers and the connectors as well as the blockers. And you have to get those people on board and understanding the value. It's always the what's in it for me.
Yeah.
Everybody you talk to, how's it going to impact their world?
And we have another question here. Should the strategy be across the company at the beginning, or should you slow roll it out across multiple departments?
Yes. You wanted to
all of the above.
I know it's an either or, but here's the thing. You want to align with the big picture strategy of the organization, right? Because what's going to make sense to executive? If executive leadership says, there's, take that hill, right? Or this is our direction, or here's our strategic focus, or, we're going to do this. It's really important for the business unit or departmental objectives to at least align with that and roll up to that. So you need to have some sense of, well, what's going to be important to leadership, and then what's that department's role in that. Now, the department will have other goals. Those goals should be aligned with leadership goals, but you're supporting the goals of that department or that function of that organization, which hopefully in a perfect world will in fact align with leadership goals. Now, many times people just don't understand the linkages. So there's one executive in an organization and said, why do we even need, fix our data for e-commerce? It's like somebody needs to explain that, that the digital experience is comprised entirely of data and information. And if it's not there, you're invisible. So there's a fundamental piece of that the leadership needs to understand those goals that you have about increasing the value of the organization or increasing revenue or customers, whatever it is, have a linkage to the data ecosystem and the data flows and the knowledge flows within the organization. When those flows can't happen, there's too much friction, you're not going to achieve your big picture.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Seth. That was great. And we got lots of questions, so that was also great. And I will now also announce that we have a book winner, George Gonzalez from San Jacinto College. So yay.
Well, again, I'm in multiple books. So I'm saying the first 10 people that send me an email. So it's not just one book.
That's just one.
Go ahead and send them. You may, people, you may say, oh, I might be too late. I might be a little flexible with that. So I want to.
Cool. And I would also say that if you want the exact citation to that article that Seth is talking about, do email him for that as well.
Yes, I'll get that as well to you. Yes. So
great. Yeah. Thank you again so much, Seth.
You bet.
And we are now going to move to our second keynote speaker of the day, and this is Kevin Klein, who is a SolarWinds head geek. He joined SolarWinds in October 2020 when SolarWinds acquired SentryOne. And I would point out that in addition to all his expertise with the database and Microsoft data platform expertise, all that good stuff, he is also a columnist for our DBTA publication, Database Trends and Applications. So let me move into Kevin's presentation.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining me for the session, Data Governance for the DBA. This session isn't strictly for just DBAs. If you're in any of the adjacent spaces to data, let's say you're a data model or a data architect, you're perhaps an analyst, this is intended as a gentle introduction for you so that you can get a grip on what data governance means in general, specifically some of the jobs that are involved with data governance and the benefits you get from implementing a data governance strategy. Now, I've been in the business for well over 30 years, working in a variety of different roles in the data lifecycle, everything from a database developer to a DBA to enterprise architect, and in data governance roles over the many years. My best known book is SQL in a Nutshell, and I'm happy to report that I'm a head geek with SolarWinds, a great company. So take a look, let's connect on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. All of those are at KE Klein. Now, one of the things that's really interesting and easy to quantify about data governance is you can see it live in the field when people and their organizations don't use data governance. A great study done by McKinsey, the famous management consulting company, shows that organizations that don't have data governance, or perhaps they have it, but it's implemented very, very poorly, it's a direct cost to these organizations. Now, there are many different IT projects that we know really benefit from it. The more complex, the more inputs and outputs it has, clearly data governance is going to help those move along more quickly and accelerate the delivery of those projects and also give you better quality. However, what's less obvious is on the my left-hand side of this slide, where different departments have to spend a whole lot of additional time and energy in order to basically get the same work done without data governance. Whereas if they had data governance, they would be able to save an enormous amount of time and energy, say in the risk mitigation department, in operations, or in finance. And a lot of this comes from simply knowing when you work in those roles that your data isn't fit to purpose. Maybe you've got 4 different entries in your customer database because Hewlett-Packard appears as Hewlett-Packard, but also as HPE, and also as Hewlett-Packard Incorporated and Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Those kinds of things means that the workers in the sales team, for example, have to know which of these different organizations, which are all really the same organization, how to handle each of those in turn. Now, there are many, many downsides to not having a good data governance plan. You can't find the right information, or maybe you can find it, but you don't have access to it. You're not able to integrate that data well. You can't disseminate that information well, or it's a very, very difficult struggle. But there's more to it than this kind of list of different issues as to the benefits. It's not just a flip side of the benefit, for example, discovery. Well, data governance doesn't just enable you to find the right information. It's a synergistic sort of experience in which data governance, once it's implemented, it enables a number of additional success factors that are not on this list of the issues that you have without data governance. So for example, when your data is very high quality, there's very, very clean data, and it's been well organized and so forth, maybe it's been tagged and classified, that means the rest of the organization can really trust this data. They'll use it for things that you really hadn't ever expected them to use it for in the past. you'll see that they maximize this asset of the organization. They really start to use it to build innovations and things that enable your organization to further improve their profitability or to make more money instead of just maybe saving some costs here or there. Another thing that we see happen is that when you have data governance in place, organizations actually use the data to drive their decision making. If you know it's good, then you know that you need to take it into account so that you can better take advantage of what history has taught you about how to react to certain circumstances, right? So a house built with data governance has many different small components. Each of these have their own little area in which you can find tools, a certain niche you can look for in the market. So at the bottom left, we have metadata management. And if you were to ask a DBA, what does that mean for you? Well, that probably means the data about the data, right? So that would mean descriptions of the tables, maybe your entity relationship diagrams, if you have any, data dictionaries, if you have any. And by the way, if you have a relational database, if that's what you're using, Oracle or Microsoft SQL Server, DB2, MySQL, PostgreSQL, they all have a built-in data dictionary. It's specified by the ANSI SQL standard called the information management schema. And so it can tell you with the same queries across all those platforms, what your tables are, what the columns in those tables are, the attributes, and maybe if there's any kinds of enforced keys and so forth. So metadata management is to collect all those things and keep them up to date, as well as possibly building in some additional sorts of documentation, things like impact analysis. If you are going to change data types, change a table, data lineage so that you can source where the data originally came from. And then we have things like data quality. And data quality is a set of actions and also a set of tools. It's a mindset in which you make sure that the data is fit to purpose. It ensures that we get the data accurately, that we get it within time, and that it is properly secured. Then we also have things like the data privacy, security, and compliance. And this has gone up in importance dramatically with the advent of laws around the world like GDPR. Brazil has one similar to that now. California has the CCPA law, which is very similar. And so these different laws have real teeth in them. If you breach these laws in terms of the data privacy of people in your database, and there is personally identifiable information in there, you could actually face massive fines, okay? So then we have master data management. Data analytics, for example, is when you really start to get value out of your data. Now we're doing things like descriptive analytics that tell us how things went in the past, along with prescriptive analytics that tell us how things might go into the future. Information lifecycle management, which tells us not only how to handle the situation which our data at inception, but also tells us all the way through its life, at what point we should archive it, at what point we can successfully throw it away, and the like. And then finally, really good organizations also directly correlate the business impact of what their data governance does according to how it improves the business. This is all under the umbrella of data governance, okay? Now, when we do data governance right, it's not just the job of data people. It's the job of the business people who really know that data thoroughly, the subject matter experts in the business units. And they work together with the different data technology owners to make sure that the business interests are properly represented and are a part of what they do on the technological side. For example, setting the time limits for RPO and RTO, which is the recovery point objective and the recovery time objective on your backup and recovery, right? So this is important, and it's something that gets more and more important the bigger the organization and the more complex their data needs are. We even see data stewards, an official role, and chief data officers who are responsible for making the most of your data and leveraging that for innovation. Now, there are some wonderful tools available to you called maturity models. I'm a big fan of the information management maturity model. And in a similar way, Gartner has produced one for data governance as well. And so what this means is on the left-hand side, we have the more chaotic, ungoverned situation. And as we begin to add in more formal processes to handle these situations, what we do is we move from a situation of chaos to one in which we have repeatable methods of getting our data integrated. Then we move to a more mature level. Maybe we don't have staff yet, but we are now trying to make sure that our data guarantees a single view of truth. You know, what is really happening within our organization? Maybe we can use reference data. We can buy data from an outside source, or we can use an industry standard data model to handle the way we set up our data. And then we move into a position in which we are really managing our data across the board. We've got a formal kind of proactive approach to it. We identify gaps and figure out what we need to add to get a true and realistic view of our organization through our data. And then finally, we're kind of leveraging our data to enable us to do more of what our mission is, to make money for shareholders or to improve our sales teams. That's when we start to see really effective data visualizations come into play, predictive analytics. And it's really at this point that we would only see a data science team being really, really effective. If you bring in data science teams any time before your data is really well optimized, they're going to spend all their time just cleaning up the data. This is Gartner's approach. IBM has a similar maturity model, a little different, but it's also quite good as well. So what does this mean for you if you are a DBA? Well, the first thing it means is that you're actually going to use your existing resources on the databases you have already. You can reverse engineer data models if you don't have them already. You can extract data dictionaries from the databases you have if you don't have them already. But it also encourages you strongly to improve your standards, use of data types, for example, so that one database won't have a character 500 field for email, and then another one has Unicode variable character 128 for an email field. You'll standardize all that. And also you'll recognize where the value is in reference data. And that brings everything together. Your architecture gets more cohesive, more consistent, and enables you to be more stable and predictable in terms of the value you give back. This can be greatly accelerated by the adoption of tools. And as I mentioned, there's tools in each of those different kind of bricks in the diagram of the house built by data governance. So there's data quality tools, master data management tools, data classification and tagging tools. Those are all built into Microsoft SQL Server, by the way. You may have to buy external tools though. For example, my company, we even make a data dictionary and data lineage tool as well. If you haven't got data governance in place in your company, there's basically 6 steps you need to take and over a period of many months to get your data governance up and running. So first of all, you got to secure top management's attention and get an executive sponsor. If possible, you want to team up with other big movements within the company or other powerful teams to help this move forward. For example, if your company is migrating to the cloud, or perhaps your company is doing a digital transformation exercise, this is the perfect time to add in data governance. Then prioritize on what's highest priority and focus on those that will return the highest value first. This enables you to build momentum for successes further down the line. And then you can use the needs-based approach of the data governance maturity model. Once we have had a success or two, we can iterate on that, go back and do it again, and each time we get better and better. And this enables us on the last step to generate excitement about it, such that one manager encourages another to have their department participate, and it gets better from there. A lot more to talk about in that department. Unfortunately, we don't have too much time here, so let's wrap up. Data governance seeks to solve many different issues that we have in terms of managing our data within our large enterprise, right? You know, it requires a combination of business owners, subject matter experts on the data, as well as the technology experts. And then there's lots of different ways you can accelerate or improve your outcomes by using tools or by focusing on specific parts of the process before going back and adding in another part of the data governance process. And finally, that also requires a little bit of upfront work on your documentation, your standardization, okay? Now, I've provided a link for you to the McKinsey white paper if you're interested in reading more about that. I also have quite a lot of my own content available online. So if you'd like an hour-long session on this or other related topics, drop me an email at kevin.klein@SolarWinds or contact me on social media at KE.Klein. And with that, I want to thank you very much for your time, and I will be available for questions afterwards. So come see me in the exhibit hall. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much. Do we have any questions for Kevin? I did think it was interesting that you talked about the maturity model, and Seth had his own maturity model. So, you know, it might be interesting at some point to compare your maturity models there. But one of the things that Seth said in answer to the question about the environmental, social, governance, and would you agree with Seth that that goes into the maturity model, or would you put that somewhere else?
Well, it does indeed go into your maturity model. And I'd even further the idea that Seth spent a lot of time talking about metrics. And that's kind of the biggest of those bricks in the house that data built, where you correlate the payoff of your data governance implementation according to how things get better.
Yeah.
So for example, if your salespeople are spending a lot less time trying to figure out which of these 4 accounts they have for a single organization, you know, that saves everyone time, makes them more trusting in their data. So Seth spent a lot of time talking about metrics, and that is also one of the key value adds, is that all of your metrics begin to improve over time as you implement data governance.
So it's sort of a machine learning approach.
Yeah, well, it definitely helps. Yeah.
Do you think that when it comes to the data governance that we're going to see more regulations like the GDPR that's going to force people into doing things that they maybe should have been doing all along?
Absolutely, yes. You know, and we already see that in Europe, where they have a more consumer-focused approach to the data laws and the whole legal structure that we see. So the US is a little more laissez-faire in regards to that, a little bit more hands-off. But as breaches occur, more and more people begin to say, you know, it'd be good if we had some laws about that.
Yes.
Yeah. And so once laws are in place in which significant financial incentives exist,
Right.
for example, middle of last year, I believe it was British Airways were fined $200 million for a data breach that was not their own. It was one of their suppliers, and it gave away personally identifiable information. So the fines typically now with these laws are based on total revenue of the organization rather than some fixed fee. And so if it varies according to how much money your organization is making, well, that gets the board of directors' attention. You know,
It certainly should.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Kevin.
Thank you.
Do appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. You know, if we were an in-person conference, what I would now say is, and there's coffee in the exhibit hall.
Exactly.
So I think we do have the exhibit hall open now. So we do urge people to go over there. But you know what? You're just gonna have to bring your own coffee. Just right. Sorry about that, but coffee's up to you guys. So do go visit the exhibits and come back at the top of the hour, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Translate that to whatever time zone you are in, and we will come back with our 4 tracks for the rest of the conference. And do not go away. Do not skip the closing keynote. John O'Brien will be giving our closing keynote. He's with Radiant Advisors, and he just always has so many insights into what we've been talking about for the full conference. So stick around, go to the exhibit hall now, come back for the sessions, stay around for John O'Brien's closing keynote. And thanks again to Kevin and to Seth for our opening keynotes this morning.
Thank you so much.